should understand, we're going to finish the trade agreements on Wednesday. And if that means people want to spend 20 hours debating one of them, they may have to spend all night Tuesday doing that, because we have some things here that we've made commitments. Yes.
Further elaboration. What I hear the Majority Leader saying is we're going to vote on the trade agreements on Wednesday. Is that what my friend is saying?
That's what I said.
And that means that the President of South Korea will have the opportunity to address a joint session on Thursday, having hopefully seen the United States approve these long-awaited trade agreements.
So unless someone has some objection, we will leave here for the evening, and the staff will work out a proper unanimous consent agreement that I will announce at some subsequent time after conferring with the Republican leader.
Reserving.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Back here.
Sorry, I can't.
Has a unanimous consent request been propounded, or was the Majority Leader simply stating that we would proceed to vote on Tuesday unless there was objection?
What I said is that my friend from Mississippi is right. Unless someone has an objection, we will set things up to vote Tuesday evening. Otherwise, we'd have to vote tomorrow afternoon.
Well, Mr. President, if I could reserve the right to object, and I may or may not object, but I think
the Senator from Mississippi, there is no unanimous consent at this time.
I'd like to be recognized to speak then.
Majority Leader still has the floor.
Mr. President?
Majority Leader.
Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Those who still object to coming off Senator Corker.
Mr. President, I'd like to vitiate the quorum.
Senator from Tennessee. Is there objection?
The right to object.
The objection is heard. Continue calling the roll, Clerk.
Mr. Alexander.
I did object. I reserve the right to object. If the Senator would like to speak, I don't want to prevent
Senator from Mississippi,
him
the
from
Senate is in a
speaking.
quorum call.
Mr. President.
Anna.
Mr. President, I move to vitiate the quorum.
Is there objection? There is objection. The clerk will continue the roll.
Ms. Ayotte.
Mr. President, parliamentary inquiry.
Senate's in a quorum call.
Mr. President, I move to vitiate the quorum.
Is there objection? There's objection. The clerk will continue the roll.
Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus.
The Senate is in a quorum call after a long and complex vote. By a vote of 48 to 51, the Senate has voted to sustain Majority Leader Harry Reid's point of order that the motion to suspend a rule, Rule 22, with the respect of the germaneness requirement in relation to an amendment to the China currency bill, is a dilatory motion. The Republicans had hoped to bring up the President's jobs bill in the form of an amendment to the China currency bill. Well, earlier today, the Senate agreed to cloture, to limit debate on the bill. That passed earlier today by a vote of 62 to 38. So allowing the adoption of a motion to consider non-germane amendments, and the President's jobs bill would have been one of them, would have required a two-thirds majority. Right now they're in a quorum call. Senator Reid is controlling the time. You saw there a couple of senators, including Senator Vitter, try to vitiate or end the quorum call, and the right to object was heard, and they continue in a quorum call. We did hear a little bit about the possible schedule in the Senate next week. It appears as if that the Senate will vote on final passage on the China currency bill next week, Tuesday of next week, and the jobs plan by Tuesday of next week as well. The jobs plan that the President had proposed was changed yesterday when Senator Reid and Democrats changed the payment method for the jobs bill from the President's proposal to a surtax on millionaires of 5.6% above $1 million per year. Reporters covering the Senate struggled to identify what was going on. Very complex parliamentary maneuvering on the floor.
Mr. Bennett.
But Alexander Bolton, writing for The Hill, writes it this way. In a shock development Thursday evening, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid triggered a rarely used procedural option informally called the nuclear option to change the Senate rules. Now, he wrote this piece just ahead of knowing the outcome of the vote, which was 48 to 51. He writes, the surprise move stunned Republicans who did not expect Reid to bring heavy artillery to what had appeared to have been a humdrum legislative knife fight. This is from Alexander Bolton of The Hill. He writes that Reid appealed a ruling from the chair that Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell does not need consent to force a vote on a motion to suspend the rules to consider an amendment after cloture had already been approved. And again, the main reason for Republicans wanting to suspend the rules would have been to consider the President's jobs plan, but that, as of now, is up in the air.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I have unanimous consent that call the quorum be terminated.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Without objection.
Thank you very much. As I understand the rules, each senator is entitled to an hour to speak post-cloture if they care to. It's my understanding that Senators Corker, Wicker, and Vitter wish to speak post-cloture. It would be better for everyone here, and, hour, if you want to speak for an hour, that's fine. I have no place to go. But if we could all have an idea as to how long Senator Corker, Senator Wicker, and Senator Vitter wishes to speak, it may help us better manage what's going on here. So if I could direct this question through the chair to my friend, Senator from Tennessee, Senator Corker.
Mr. President,
Tennessee.
thank you for recognizing me. I really don't want to speak. Here's what I want to happen. I think members on both sides of the aisle feel like this institution has degraded into a place that is no longer a place of any deliberation at all. And I'd like for you and the minority leader to explain to us, so that we have one story here in public, as to what has happened this week to lead us to the place that we are. That's all I'm asking. That's all I want to know. Explain how the greatest deliberative body on a bill that many would say was a messaging bill in the first place, ended up having no amendments, and we're in this place that we are right now. I'd just like to understand that.
Mr. President, through the chair to my friend from Tennessee and others who wish to listen, we moved to this legislation with the China currency with a heavy vote. We had 79 senators who wished to proceed to that. Once we're on the bill, I partially filled the tree. And why did I do that? Because I found over the last Congress and 9 months that when I try to have an open amendment process, it is a road to nowhere. It just hasn't worked. We haven't been able to effectuate a single bill being passed that way. Regardless of whether that's right or wrong, that's what I did. Senator McConnell wanted to offer amendment on the President's jobs bill. To do that, and that, in effect, tied us down because he was unwilling to let us move to any other amendments. I was willing to move to other amendments. Specifically, everyone that was involved in this process thought that Senator Hatch was entitled to an amendment because his was clearly germane and relevant. But without going into he said, the fact is that no amendments were offered, even though I was happy to have some amendments offered. Now, what has happened over the last 9 months is that, and even this went on last year where we learned about this, when cloture was invoked, senators, it was led by Senator DeMint, and then Senator Coburn picked up on this quickly. As soon as cloture was invoked, motions to suspend the rules were filed. Now, as I said today, that was done in this instance. Now, I know that my Republican friends say the reason we did that, we couldn't offer amendments on the underlying bill. I disagree with that. I think people could have offered amendments, but we are at the point where we were. We had 9 or 10 amendments 9 or 10 motions to suspend the rules. I worked all day, much of the time later this afternoon with Senator McConnell, trying to come up with a list of those amendments that had suspended. I had to get approval of my caucus to move to all those amendments. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. In effect, made a number of my senators very unhappy by moving to amendments that are extremely difficult. They are not, the only amendment that I'm aware of that's germane to what we are working on is Senator Hatch's amendment. The rest of them are not germane. There may be good amendments, like great message amendments, causing a lot of pain over here, but I agreed to do 7 of the 9. And Senator McConnell said that he needed at least 1 more. I couldn't get 1 more. So what procedurally took place here is this. I believe that, as I indicated in my opening statement, that Rule 22, dealing with cloture, says that when cloture is invoked, it is finite. It's finite. It ends debate on that issue, unless there are amendments that have been filed that can be dealt with during the 30 hours. There weren't any in this instance. So I have been here quite a while, and one of the most unpleasant things I've had to deal with over the years has been the vote-around when we do the budget thing. We've had 60, 70, 80, 120 amendments filed. Under this procedure that has recently been adopted by the minority in this instance, there's no limit to how many amendments could be filed. Today, there was 9 or 10. This has to come to an end. This is not a way to legislate. And that's why the motion to overrule the ruling of the chair, that's why I made that. I think this is something that was discussed in great detail at the beginning of this Congress. I had a number of senators on my side who believe very strongly, as my friend from Tennessee has just described, that the Senate has become a place that's very difficult to debate anything. And so Senators Merkley and Senator Udall, joined by others, wanted to change the rules. And at that time, we believed, and the parliamentarian and all the law that we were familiar with said a simple majority could change the rules dramatically as how it relates to filibuster and all other things. I felt that certain changes were important, and maybe we should ease into this. That's why we are not reading the amendments now as we used to do, be forced to do on occasion. And we had a gentleman's agreement that there would be motions to proceed would be not opposed to generally. I would not fill the tree all the time. And as a result of that, Senators Merkley and Udall, much to their consternation, because I didn't join with majority of my caucus, opposed what they did. And because I was hopeful that we could get back to doing some legislating that we'd done in the past. Now, I feel very comfortable that what we're doing and what we did today is the right thing to do. My staff this morning, when I talked about doing this, the first thing he said to me, well, what if you're in the minority? Let me tell everyone within the sound of my voice. If I were in the minority, I wouldn't do this. I think it's dilatory and wrong. Just as I've said when we were in the famous debate that's now famous dealing with the judges issue that we had, the nuclear option, I said if I were in a position to exert what I felt was the nuclear option on judges, I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't. I think we have to do a better job of legislating here under the rules. And so even though perhaps Senator Merkley and Senator Udall were disappointed in my advocacy to not massively change these rules, I went along hoping that things would work out better. What just took place here is an effort to try to expedite what goes on around here. And am I 100% sure that I'm right? No, but I feel pretty comfortable with what we've done. There has to be some end to the dilatory tactics to stop things. Cloture means end. It's over with.
I'm not sure who has the floor, Mr. President. Who has the floor?
Who has the floor still?
I'd like to also give my version, if I may, to the distinguished senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I
Majority Leader has the floor.
I yield to my friend, the Republican leader, to respond to any questions that the senator from Tennessee may have.
Yeah, let me,
Without objection.
the benefit of our colleagues, explain what in fact happened. It's not complicated. It was pretty clear whether you liked this bill or didn't, it was going to pass. You could tell that by cloture on the motion to proceed with a very large majority. So I don't think my good friend, the majority leader, had to worry about whether or not his bill was ultimately going to pass. The question was whether there were going to be any amendments at any point to the bill. And my conference made a decision, actually against my best advice, to go on and invoke cloture on the bill after we had had no amendments. And the reason we had no amendments is because the majority leader used a device that we've all become all too familiar with called filling up the tree, thereby allowing no amendments that he doesn't approve. And he said, you know, we're open for amendments, but what he means is we're open for any amendment that I approve. So he filled up the tree and prior to cloture on the bill, controlled whether any amendments would be allowed and chose not to allow any as a practical matter. So against my best advice, my conference decided to invoke cloture on the bill, so we were moving toward approving the bill with no expression whatsoever. And so we have in the post-cloture environment the motion to suspend, which has not been abused by this minority. Not been abused by this minority. The majority leader, in effect, has overruled the chair with a simple majority vote and established the precedent that even one single motion to suspend, even one, is dilatory, changing the rules of the Senate. And if you look back at this bill, what we've had in effect is no amendments before cloture, no motions to suspend after cloture, no expression on the part of the minority at all. And I don't know why anybody should act like they were offended by non-germane amendments. This is the U.S. Senate. We don't have any rules of germaneness. No, we don't. Any subject on any bill can be offered as an amendment. We all know that. Now, the fundamental problem here is the majority never likes to take votes. That's the core problem. And I can remember when I was the whip in the majority saying to my members over and over and over again when they were whining about casting votes they didn't want to vote, that the price of being in the majority is you have to take bad votes. Because in the United States Senate, the minority is entitled to be heard. Not entitled to win, but entitled to be heard. And so that's the core problem here. And I'd say to my friend, the majority leader, and this is nothing personal about it, I like him, we deal with each other every day, we are fundamentally turning the Senate into the House. No amendments before cloture, no motion to suspend after cloture, the minority is out of business. And it's particularly bad on a bill that has the support of over 60 members, as this one did. If you're not among those 60, you're out of luck. Now look, this is a bad mistake. The way you get business done in the Senate is be prepared to take bad votes, and at some point, if 60 members of the Senate want a bill to pass, it'll pass. And if 60 members of the Senate don't want a bill to pass, it won't pass. And it is more time-consuming. And I assume that's why a lot of people ran for the Senate instead of the House, because they wanted to be able to express themselves. This is a freewheeling body. And everybody is better off when we operate that way. Everybody is, whether you're in the majority or the minority, because today's minority may be tomorrow's majority. And the country is better off to have at least one place where there's extended debate and where you have to reach a supermajority to do things. And so I would say to my good friend, the majority leader, I understand his frustration, but you were going to win on this bill. You didn't need to jam us. You shouldn't jam us on any bill, but on this bill, you were going to win. Now, some of us think we were wasting our time because, as the senator from Tennessee said, this wasn't going to become law anyway. And we're sitting around here when we ought to be passing trade bills. The president's asked us to vote on his jobs bill. I wanted to give him an opportunity to have his vote the other day. You guys didn't even want to vote on what the president was asking us to vote on without any changes. But you could prevent that, and you did. Look, let's don't change this place. America doesn't need less debate. It needs more debate. And when 60 members of the United States Senate decide to pass something, it'll pass. I think we made a big mistake tonight, and as soon as we all kind of cool off and think about it over the weekend, I hope we'll undo what we did tonight, because it's not in the best interest of this institution or the American people.
Mr. President. The Senate should function like the Senate, and I acknowledge that. But we have major pieces of legislation that have been brought down as a result of not being able to have finality to that legislation, unending amendments that are not germane, irrelevant, small business innovation bill that had passed in the past years easily. We had the Economic Development Administration bill passed easily in the past. Job-creating bills that we had an open amendment process, they were brought to, it was simply stopped. Now, there are rules of germaneness in the Senate. There are rules of germaneness in the Senate. And let's think about these amendments that I agreed to. There are others that I didn't agree to, but the amendments that I agreed we should have a vote on. Not that I wanted to have a vote on them, because they had nothing to do with the underlying bill, nothing. And there are rules of germaneness that should be the case.
Rules of germaneness before cloture?
De Mint Amendment, right to work. Corn Amendment, fighter planes to Taiwan, we already had a vote on that. We agreed to have another one. Hatch Amendment, that one is relevant and it's germane. Barrasso, cement, not so. Paul, federal funding audit. Coburn, foreign aid. McConnell, Jobs Act. Mr. President, part of cloture is enforcing germaneness. That's what it's all about. We're happy to do germane amendments, but the fact is the Republican leader himself decided not to have amendments on this bill. I agreed to amendments on the bill prior to cloture. If everybody doesn't know that, they should, because that's the way it is. So, Mr. President, we have to make the Senate a better place. And I think a better place is to do what was done tonight, to get rid of these dilatory amendments. I mean, this is, we would be happy if poor Senator Bingaman could get some bills out of the Energy Committee. We could do something on cement. We could do something on, if we could get some bills out of the Foreign Relations Committee, we could maybe look at foreign aid. I mean, you know, these things are dilatory and only unnecessary in an effort to divert from what we're really trying to do here, and that is legislate. So the issue is this, Mr. President. I believe that what we did at the beginning of this Congress was the right thing to do. But as the weeks and months have rolled on, wasting months of our time on a CR that was done on a series of CRs, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, defunding government till October of a few days ago, what a waste of time. We had spent months on raising the debt ceiling, months, and making it nearly impossible, if not impossible, to legislate on other matters. And when we get a chance to legislate, we shouldn't be held up by these dilatory matters. I'm willing to legislate. I've taken a lot of hard votes in my career, and I would have been happy to vote on these. But there has to be an end to this. I think that, and I'd be happy if my friend from
My friend is but let me make sure we understand that there aren't any rules of germaneness pre-cloture in the Senate. There aren't any. Any amendment can be offered on any subject. And that's been one of the great frustrations of every majority down through the years, and we all know that. So my friend, the majority leader, in order to prevent votes on unpleasant amendments, fills up the tree and decides himself that he's going to confine the amendments to those that are either germane, relevant, or put another way, of his choosing. Of his choosing.
Wait, what was that?
Of your choosing, whatever you want to allow. And my friend keeps talking about wasting time. Well, wasting time to him might not be wasting time to us. You know, we might not think that offering an amendment on something that we think is important for the country is a waste of the Senate's time. So who gets to decide who's wasting time around here? None of us. None of us have that authority to decide who's wasting time. But the way you make things happen is you get 60 votes at some point and you move a matter to conclusion. And the best way to do that is to have an open amendment process. That's the way this place used to operate. I've been here a while. I know this isn't the way it's always happened. This is not the way we always operate, and we did get things accomplished. Not by trying to strangle everybody and shut everybody up, but by allowing the process to work. And when the Senate gets tired of the process, 60 people shut it down, and you move to conclusion. That's how you move something ahead, not by preventing the voices. I mean, we have sat around here 2 days in quorum calls. You all notice that? We could have been voting on amendments, sitting around in quorum calls. Talk about a waste of time.
Mr. President, Mr. President.
Yield.
Mr. President, I'm going to respond to this. I don't know the exact number now, but almost 30 judges are waiting to be approved. People who are waiting to change their lives for their patriotic duty to public service. I can't file cloture in all those. There's 29 of them. We, Mr. President, have been stymied here in this Congress in getting things done, holding up nominations for judges, holding up nominations. Some people have been on the executive calendar for a long, long time. It's unfair. That's what's going on around. So we can do all the make-believe that my friend, the Republican leader, is talking about what great things should happen around here. Well, I'll tell you a few things should happen. We should be able to move matters through here that have been happening since the beginning of this country. Nominations, for example. We can't do that because my friend, the Republican leader, as candid as he was, said his #1 goal is to defeat President Obama. And that's what's been going on for 9 months here. And this issue relating to these dilatory tactics on these motions to suspend the rules is just part of that game that's been played. Let's get back, I agree, let's get back to legislating as we did before the mantra around here was defeat Obama.
Mr. President, would the Majority Leader yield for a question?
I'd be happy to yield.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I pose this question and I look around this floor, with the exception of Senator Inouye, my dear friend from Hawaii, nobody has served in this body longer than I have of the current membership. Nobody. I keep hearing this talk about 60 votes. Most votes, you win by 51 votes. And this constant mantra of 60 votes, 60 votes, this is some new invention, I tell my friends, based on my sense of history. So my question to the Majority Leader, whether we were here with a Democratic majority or a Republican majority, does he remember a time when judges who were confirmed unanimously, every single Republican, every single Democrat voting for them out of the committee, would then sit on the calendar for 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 months because there's not an agreement to vote on them without a 60-vote supermajority? I mean, I cannot remember any time in 37 years. I don't know if the Majority Leader recalls such a time.
The senator from Vermont has been here longer than I have, but he's absolutely right. And I would also, Mr. President, add this. The Republican leader said, and I think this says it all, today is an extemporaneous remarks from his position here where he's now standing. And I quote, if 60 senators are in favor of bringing a matter to a conclusion, it will be brought to a conclusion. That's what happened a few minutes ago. And that's what cloture is all about. That's what cloture is all about. I believe in cloture. As I've indicated several times earlier, I wasn't in favor of changing the rules relating to cloture that some of my colleagues did, but I think this is a step forward. It'll make this process work a lot better. I want to yield to my friend from Mississippi, Yoder.
Senator from Mississippi.
I thank
Yield for a question.
the distinguished Majority Leader for yielding, and I will not take long. I've been in the Senate 4 years now, and I think my colleagues know that I don't come down to the floor and spout a lot of hot air. But I have to be heard tonight, and I will agree with my friend, the Majority Leader, on one thing. This is no way to legislate. He said those words a few moments ago, and I agree. We have become accustomed to a procedure. And I have disagreed with that procedure, but it has been the regular order during the time I've been here. And that is, the usual practice is a bill is brought to the floor and the Majority Leader immediately offers every amendment that can possibly be offered in a parliamentary way, thus filling the amendment tree and preventing other senators from offering amendments. Then cloture is filed, and we don't have an opportunity to have a full hearing. Now, I'm told this has not always been the practice, but we've been accustomed to that practice. What happened tonight is far different from that. And I think that's why my friend from Tennessee propounded the question to the Majority Leader. We had a bill, and it may be a messaging bill, but if it were passed, it would be a significant piece of legislation. I think both sides acknowledge this. And no amendments were allowed pre-cloture, and no amendments have been allowed post-cloture. And the Majority Leader this very day, after the cloture vote, assured the Senate that we would be operating under an open process. He said those words. not only that, and perhaps the majority leader, when I finish in just a moment or two, could correct me, but I believe I heard the majority leader say we would be allowed to offer motions to suspend the rules on a number of amendments, and debate would be allowed. Now, what occurred was Senator Coburn offered his motion to suspend the rules on his amendment, and we assumed that we would be able to do this on at least a few amendments. But the very first amendment that was offered, the majority leader suggested to the chair and made the point of order to the chair that that was dilatory. One amendment we wanted. And that was deemed dilatory by the majority leader, and the parliamentarian correctly instructed the chair to overrule that suggestion by the majority leader, upholding the precedence of this Senate. And one by one, Democratic members of this body had to march down and vote to overrule the parliamentarian of this Senate for the very purpose of shutting down the chance to offer one single amendment. When the majority leader well knew he had the votes to win, but our rules have, I thought, been designed, and I think our society is designed around the concept that the minority has an opportunity to be protected. The minority has an opportunity to be heard in this body of all bodies. And what we have done tonight, unless we can remove that, is we have changed the rules of the Senate on a messaging bill, on a matter that the majority leader had the votes on. And so that is my objection. That is why I am so disturbed about the overreaction and heavy-handedness of this move. This is not a matter of supporting the leader on one bill that he wants to get us out of town on. This is precedent. And we have, unless we can change it, we have forever changed the right of the majority to be heard post-cloture, and I am saddened about that.
Majority Leader.
First of all, let me tell my friend that amendments could have been offered pre-cloture. And my friend said he thought we were going to be able to offer some amendments post-cloture with their motions to suspend the rules. And that's what I said would happen, and I agreed to that. 7 amendments. Now, people are saying, well, you choose them. I didn't choose the amendments. I didn't come up with these things. They came up with them. These are the ones they gave me. And I guess I was supposed to pick and select which ones they did. And that's what I did. I could not get agreement on some of these amendments, and I've explained that in some detail previously. Now, also, everyone should recognize motions to suspend the rules are still available. They're just not available post-closure. The Rules 22 provides, quote, is it the sense of the Senate that the debate shall be brought to a close. That's what it says. It's a rule that's been in existence for a long time. So I'm sorry my friend is disappointed, but I think the playbook that he's reading from is not really accurate. Please.
I'd say to my
Republican
majority
leader.
leader,
Republican Leader.
the senator from Mississippi is accurate. Until the vote we had just a few moments ago, motions to suspend post-cloture were appropriate. And no longer are they appropriate because, as my friend from Mississippi pointed out, we have, in effect, changed the rule.
Majority Leader still has the floor.
Mr. President, yes.
Mr.
I
President.
yield to my friend from Tennessee.
Senator from Tennessee.
First of all, I want to thank the leader for taking the time to explain from his perspective what has happened. I guess what I'd like to, Mr. President, to understand is when amendments are offered, why don't we just go ahead and vote on them? I mean, it's become standard procedure.
Could you start over? I was interrupted.
Yeah, that's no
Senator
problem.
Tennessee.
First of all, I want to thank the leader for taking the time to explain from his perspective what has happened. Here's what I don't understand. We have a cloture motion, a motion to proceed on a Monday. It's Thursday night. We've had no votes on anything other than a cloture vote. I guess what I'd love to understand is why don't we just immediately begin voting on amendments? We could have been done with this bill yesterday. Instead, everybody cools their heels, waits around while some negotiation takes place. It's sort of a self-appointed rules committee. And then at the end, something like this happens. I'd like to understand from the leader's perspective, Mr. President, why we just don't go ahead and vote on amendments. Again, we could have been done yesterday.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, if I could just respond to my friend. People around here are talking as if this is something that never has happened before. This happened, I don't remember all the times that I've been in the Senate, that the chair, as brilliant as our parliamentarian is, and the chair does his best to sustain what the parliamentarian wants, he is not always sustained. There are all kinds of examples. And I've been involved in a number of those. So this isn't as if it never happened before. We did this with the understanding that what is going on here is dilatory, and that's what the majority of the Senate felt. I would yield to
yield for a question.
I would be happy to yield to my friend.
Senator from New York.
And I would like, in the form of a question to the Majority Leader, also try to impart some, because we're all frustrated. And Senator from Tennessee and I talked about that frustration at the beginning of this session in an attempt, obviously it hasn't worked terribly well, to try and straighten this out. And you are frustrated. We can talk about the specifics here. And the one point I would make is the Majority Leader, isn't that true, Mr. Leader, offered on the floor. He said, I will allow amendments on this bill yesterday. And the only amendment that was sent to us was the amendment to have a vote on the President's budget. Is that correct? That was before cloture was filed.
Bill, that's right.
And it was not widely known on this side, but the Majority Leader had offered amendments on this bill. But the question I want to ask, and I want to make a statement, or I want to lead up to the question. You're frustrated because you feel the tree is filled all the time and you can't make amendments. But we are frustrated because the 60-vote rule, which has always been used here, is now used routinely, which it never had been done before. Judges, district court judges. I've been here in the Senate 13 years. I was in the House 18 years and followed the Senate, cared about judges. It never happened before. Routine appointments, assistant secretaries of this, deputy secretaries of that, 60 votes. And on bill after bill after bill, the procedure of this place works that somebody has to object. That's why you file cloture. Otherwise, we could proceed. In the past, the motion to proceed was not routinely blocked. And almost every single bill, important bills, obviously. No one thinks the health care bill should have passed by 51 votes. But on minor bills, we had a filibuster on technical corrections to the transportation bill where, you know, Route 287 was written down Route 387 by mistake, and it was filibustered, 60 votes. So our defense is to fill the tree. But what we ought to try to do here, and as I said, the senator from Tennessee and I futilely tried earlier this year and maybe calm things down, is maybe use this flashpoint to try and come together and work that out again. That maybe the minority would not filibuster routinely everything, appointments, judges, minor bills, save it for the major bills. And in return, I agree with the minority leader, the Republican leader. The deal around this place is the majority sets the agenda and the minority gets to offer amendments. That has been the rule since I got here, and it's one of the reasons you're absolutely correct. I say to my friend from Kentucky why I left the House to run for the Senate. But it's gotten to an extreme. You would say My colleagues on the other side of the aisle would say it got to the extreme because we always fill the tree. We would say it got to the extreme because you filibuster everything and require 60 votes. We only have 53, we know that, on everything. Judges, appointments, minor bills. And if we're going to bring this place back to order, and my friend the senator from Tennessee, the junior senator from Tennessee, if we're going to bring this place back to a way where we can legislate, we are going to have to both sides back off. And we're going to have to figure out how to do that, which we haven't very adequately yet. Just one other point before I ask my question. The senator from West Virginia had a few of us on his boat this week. And a number of the freshman senators from the other side of the aisle were on the boat, and I was on the boat. And we began to talk about, they were asking, why is the place so bollocksed up? And I was explaining, you know, some of the greatest joys I've had in the Senate and the House were conference committees and offering amendments and things like that. And we all said together, why can't we get back to that? But let me say that it is not simply filling the tree and preventing amendments that has caused this problem. It is routinely requiring 60 votes before the Senate gets a drink of water. And so my question to the majority leader is this. Would he be willing, and we need a little bit of a cooling off period, would he be willing to sit down with the minority leader and others in an effort to try and figure out how we can get back to somewhat more of a regular order in regards to what I said?
To my friend and to others who are listening, so everyone understands a little bit of the frustration that I have. We all went through the battle on the FEMA bill. Everyone remembers that. People who are in the dark bowels of this building someplace typed that bill up. They made a mistake and had a comma in the wrong place, a comma in the wrong place. I asked consent. That was a technical correction. Could we get that done? There were already press releases out from my Republican friends. We're not going to agree to any consents on anything. So that, I mean, you talk about frustration. There's plenty of it to go around. Mr. President, I want to try to end this on a high note. I love this institution. I've devoted most of my life here in this building, not only as a longtime member of the House and the Senate, but I lived here going to law school. I worked in this building. I was a cop in this building. I love this building. I love this institution. I don't want to do anything to denigrate the institution. Maybe there's blame to go around. I think there probably is. But frustration builds upon frustration, and as a result of that, we have situations just like this. So here is my suggestion. I think that just as we had a cooling off period, as we indicated that we would, on that FEMA CR, we had a cooling off period. The Republican leader, I agreed that that would be the right thing to do. And we came back and worked something out. We did it very quickly. Wasn't to everyone's satisfaction. I had people upset. He had people upset. But we did that. So it would be my suggestion that we do what I originally suggested. I think we should go ahead and do final passage on this matter on Tuesday night and do the judge first and vote on the jobs bill. And we'll do the trade stuff. And I am happy to not only sit down with the Republican leader, and I'm sure we can all cinch up our belts and, as I say in the Old and New Testament, gird up our loins and try to do a better job of how we try to get along here. I've talked to the Republican leader only briefly about this, but I had a discussion with my leadership today, and one of the things that I was going to announce, and so here it is, one of the things I want to do is have a joint caucus. I want to have one with Democratic senators and Republican senators. And at that time, we can all talk about some of the frustrations we all have. I wanted to do that the first week we got back after the next recess. I hope that doesn't, because all my people don't know about this, and certainly I haven't finalized this with the Republican leader. But I think that would be a good step forward, that Senator McConnell and I could be there in front of everybody else together. Questions could be asked, statements could be made, and we would see if that would let a little air out of the tires. But, and I'll be happy to, next time we get cloture in that event sometime in the future, to sit down and find out what, if anything, we should do post-closure on matters relating to people who are frustrated. So that's my statement, Mr. President. So I'm not asking for consent on anything, but I would hope that we could all leave, and I would have Senator McConnell and I would direct the staff to come up with something, an arrangement comparable to what I just suggested. I know what the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
The U.S. Senate's in a quorum call, but they are likely to gavel out shortly as the end of this Senate session sees a very complex parliamentary movement and vote in the vote that just happened half an hour, 45 minutes ago or so, and some passionate comments on the Senate floor. For much of the day, the Senate has been working on a bill that would allow sanctions against China if the Treasury Department were to find that China manipulated its currency. They voted earlier today to invoke cloture to limit debate on the bill. That vote was 62 to 38. They also agreed by a vote of 48 to 51. They sustained a point of order made by Senator Harry Reid this evening regarding the germaneness of amendments to the bill. Republicans had hoped to bring up an amendment to the bill which would be the president's original jobs plan. But again, that's a point of order made by Senator Reid was sustained, and that vote and that the outcome of that vote engendered the discussion that followed. And we're going to give you a chance to see a lot of that debate that just happened after the vote once the Senate gavels out. From what we heard on the Senate floor, we expect that the Senate will take a final passage vote on the China currency bill next Tuesday. Also, according to Senator Reid, the jobs bill will come up for a vote, and the Senate's expected by Wednesday of next week to also vote on the free trade agreements. That will come up in the House next week as well. The House earlier this week in committee approved those bills, the free trade agreements for South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. They will be before a Senate committee Tuesday of next week, and then in the Senate itself Wednesday of next week.
Ms. Brasso.
I'm just guessing.
Mr. President,
Mr. Majority Leader.
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent Senate proceed to approve the morning business centers permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
And we're going to have no more votes. I've checked with the Republican leader.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.